This is Carolina Ghost Towns, a podcast about the vanished towns and lost communities in South Carolina, North Carolina, and maybe a few other places. I'm your host, Tom Taylor. My great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was William Taylor. He was born in Ireland and came to South Carolina in 1767 aboard a ship called the Earl of Donegal. His son was also named William. My maternal grandfather was William Thomas, for whom I'm named. His grandfather was also named William. I've also got lots of cousins named either Bill or William in honor of these ancestors. Suffice it to say, we've got lots of Williams in our family. It was a popular name in the 17th and 18th centuries. So many Williams immigrated to the Appalachian region that its inhabitants became known as hillbillies, a term still in use today, but whose origins have mostly been lost. Names go through phases of popularity based on current pop stars and celebrities. Think about how many kids are going to be named Taylor. In the case of colonial America, it was William of Orange, a.k.a. King William III, King of England from 1689 until his death in 1702. The College of William and Mary is named for him and his wife, Queen Mary. Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia bears his name. In South Carolina, we have a county named Williamsburg, and that's where today's ghost town is located. Like Willtown in the last episode, this Willtown is also named for William of Orange. And like the previous Willtown in Charleston County, this one in Williamsburg County also faded into obscurity. Willtown in Williamsburg County was situated on Black Mingo Creek, about 7 miles upstream from its confluence with the Black River. The names Willtown and Black Mingo were used almost interchangeably for the spot. The earliest inhabitants were the Chickasaw, who established trade relations with early English settlers. In their language, the suffix Minko or Mingo meant chief. The tidal creeks above Georgetown were easily navigable, and the surrounding land was excellent for growing rice and other crops. While there were land grants for the area, most of the colonial landowners preferred to live in Charleston and manage their plantations remotely. One of these early landowners was William Screven. Reverend William Augustine Screven was born in Somerset, England in 1629 and came to America in 1681. In Boston, he was ordained as a Baptist minister and planned to establish a church in Kittery, Maine. Apparently, he ran afoul of the established churches in the area. At that time, Maine was part of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, run by Puritans who didn't take to his Baptist ideals. He was apprehended for preaching, fined, and imprisoned, and forbidden to preach any further. He continued to preach and was arrested again. One story says that he and his 10 followers were escorted to the edge of town and told never to return under penalty of hanging. Screven left New England for Charleston, where he founded the First Baptist Church of Charleston, the oldest Baptist church in the South, but kept his plantation on Black Mingo Creek. Screven's son, Elisha, laid out the town of Georgetown in 1721 and is considered the town's founder. In 1747, the colonial government of South Carolina authorized the clearing of the Black River and Black Mingo Creek to aid navigation inland. With the improvements, travel along these waterways increased. By the mid-1700s, boats were traveling from Georgetown up the Black River to the plantations along the Black Mingo Creek. In 1750, James Fowler, a descendant of William Screven, established a trading post at the location that would later become known as Willtown. Fowler was another of those absentee landlords. Fowler was a wealthy Charleston merchant who owned a rice plantation on Black Mingo Creek. His main store was in Charleston and ran regular advertisements in the local papers.
James Fowler has just imported in the Carolina packet, Captain White, from London, and the first vessel from Bristol, a neat assortment of East India and European goods, which will be sold at reasonable rates at his store on Elliott Street.
At his Willtown location, Fowler, quote, exchanged tape and buttons and rum and molasses for the cowhides, deerskins, and tobacco the people of Williamsburg brought, close quote, according to a 1923 history of Williamsburg County by William Body. In 1760, Fowler was joined by another merchant, Charles Woodmason. Woodmason was an ordained minister with the Church of England. As an itinerant Anglican priest, he traveled nearly 3,000 miles across the Carolina Lowcountry, eventually ending up at St. Frederick's Parish in Georgetown County. Woodmason purchased 2,000 acres of land along the PD River and operated the Charles Woodmason and Company store at Willtown. According to the book, The Carolina Backcountry on the Eve of the Revolution, the journal and other writings of Charles Woodmason, Anglican itinerant, Woodmason, quote, refused 2 proposals to establish backcountry stores, being intimidated by the fear of the Cherokee and Catawba Indians. In 1757, however, he began a store on Black Mingo Creek, where he possessed the double advantage of being close to his plantations and far from hostile Indians. 3 years later, he petitioned the Assembly for permission to construct a substantial floating bridge across the Black Mingo Creek. But if the Assembly took action, it left no record of it. Close quote. Reverend Woodmason kept an extensive journal and is one of the best records of life in the pre-revolutionary backcountry. By all accounts, he was an amazing individual and served as minister, storekeeper, planter, poet, writer, and lieutenant in the Black River Militia. Woodmason eventually returned to England, where he died in 1789. William Body, in his History of Williamsburg, recounts another resident of Willtown.
About that same time, Dr. John Augustus Fink settled at Willtown and began the practice of physic. He established an inn and was as celebrated as mine host as a healer of diseases. He practiced medicine for everybody within a radius of 30 miles of Willtown. Men came from a greater range than this to refresh themselves at his bar and board. From Dr. Fink's old account books and the inventory made of his estate after his death in 1766, one may know the names of nearly every man in that country when he elected to celebrate a week and when his babies came.
Body goes on to say this about Willtown.
Willtown reached its zenith about 1800, even though a commercial traveler from Europe then described it as a miserable hamlet with about 30 houses and 8 stores. These merchants had large storehouses and lines of sloops, flatboats, and periaguas running to Georgetown, from which place their own schooners carried the country produce they had collected at Willtown to Europe and brought back manufactured supplies. One might purchase from these merchants at Willtown almost any article he could find, even in metropolitan markets. The first post office established in Williamsburg district was at Willtown. Willtown lay on the post route which Benjamin Franklin established from Savannah, Georgia to Wickesate, Maine. Since Willtown was on this post route from north to south, was a stopping place for travelers in those days. And since there were many wealthy cultured people living in the community, it became one of the best-known points in South Carolina.
Body also describes a famous inn at Willtown known as either Dollard House or the Red House, so named because of the red brick used in its construction.
Patrick Dollard had an inn there. He was a witty Irishman and a genial host. Travelers anticipated their reception and treatment at his inn. He told them wonderful tales and fed them on well-prepared fish and game, for which this community is famous. In 1785, Bishop Asbury stopped at this old inn on his first visit to South Carolina, and he recorded in his diary that he was there well used. Aaron Burr frequently halted there for refreshment and rest while he was visiting his daughter Theodosia, who married Governor Alston of South Carolina and whose unknown fate is the subject of some of the most pathetic tales told.
That doesn't mean that all was peaceful in Willtown Black Mingo. Dollard's Tavern in Willtown became the site of the Battle of Black Mingo on September 29, 1780. General Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, set up an ambush for a much larger force of British loyalists. Wikipedia has this description of the battle.
Marion had wanted to surprise the Loyalists with an early morning attack. The surprise was spoiled when, at nearly midnight, the lead horses in his column began crossing Black Mingo Creek via the wooden plank bridge 1 mile downstream from the Loyalist camp, alerting camp sentinels. Alarm shots were heard in the Loyalist camp, and British Colonel John Cumming Ball mobilized his forces to repulse the rebel attack. Marion divided his small force into 3 groups, sending them down the main road, and off to the right and left, surrounding the Loyalist troops. Ball formed up his men in a moonlit field adjacent to Dollard's Tavern and ordered them to hold their fire until rebel fighters were within 30 yards, 27 meters. The Loyalists, although greater in number, found themselves between 2 firing lines, gave way after just a few rounds, and retreated into the swamp. Although less than 100 men were engaged in the actual fighting that lasted maybe 15 minutes, Marion lost 2 men, including Captain George Logan, and 8 wounded. The Loyalists lost 3 and 13 mortally wounded or captured. Marion confiscated Colonel Ball's sorrel gelding as a personal prize and rode the equine to the end of the war after naming it Ball.
Much has been said about how the Civil War pitted brother against brother, but it seems not as much attention is paid to how this played out in the American Revolution. I mentioned in a previous episode that one of my ancestors fought on the side of the British and was executed as a result. Willtown wasn't immune. Neighbor fought against neighbor. Captain John Brockington was one of those that fought with the British. In the royal colony, he had been a tax collector and later served as a magistrate. After the war, Brockington chose to remain on his plantation at Willtown. Brockington's property was now subject to confiscation by an act of the legislature. He sent a petition to the legislature in 1786, declaring that he had been misled by the British, and acknowledged, quote, "with contrition the justice of the sentence passed against him," close quote. He also lamented, quote, with heartfelt sorrow the situation of his unhappy wife and children reduced to the utmost distress, only for his crimes." Close quote. Amazingly, another petition was sent to the legislature in support of Brockington. It was signed by 82 of his neighbors in Willtown. Willtown thrived for a while until two men got into an argument over roads sometime around 1820. Thomas McConnell and James Dozier, two state legislators, had a dispute regarding the road leading across Black Mingo and into town. The dispute resulted in the state decommissioning the public roads into Willtown and moving the bridge a few miles south to Shepherd's Ferry. With traffic bypassing the town, the warehouses began to decline and the stores closed. The urge to move westward also contributed to the decline in population in Willtown. That brings us to the story of Cleland Blaine and Black Mingo Baptist Church. As a boy, Blaine moved from Georgetown to Willtown to live with his uncle, John Screven, a descendant of William Screven. He established a successful mercantile business in Willtown and became wealthy. Blaine was quite the character. He built a mansion on the banks of the Black Mingo filled with exotic furniture and collections. Blaine put a grandfather clock in every room of the house, each set 5 minutes apart. Every 5 minutes, a clock would chime. Cleland Blaine used part of his wealth to create one of the most enduring remnants of Willtown, Black Mingo Baptist Church. The church was built in 1843 from timber harvested from the surrounding forest. The National Register of Historic Places described the church this way.
Exterior. A two-story rectangular block, the church is set on low brick piers. Pier brickwork is American common bond. The frame building is sheathed with weatherboard and has a low-pitched gable roof. Presently, the roof is covered with modern composition shingles, although the original wood-shingled roof is intact beneath. A wide beaded entablature with a deep, plain boxed cornice extends unbroken around the perimeter of the roofline. An unfluted two-story pilaster distinguishes each corner of the building. Round-headed windows with intersecting tracery are featured on all elevations. The central bay of the facade, northwest elevation, and the northeast and southwest elevations have narrow, three-paneled double doors with a semicircular transom with intersecting tracery. The facade is divided into three evenly spaced bays. The first story features a central doorway, flanked at right and left by a 9/6 window, and the second story features three 6/6 windows. This elevation is characterized by a deep, boxed pediment created by the gable end. The three-bay door and window arrangement of the facade is repeated on both side elevations, with the exception that the bays are more widely spaced. A large 30/30 window dominates the central bay of both stories of the southeast elevation. It is flanked by 6/6 windows on the first story level. The deep, boxed pediment of the facade gable end is repeated on the rear elevation. The church is distinguished by several elements reflective of the Greek Revival style, including the two-story unfluted corner pilasters, the wide-headed entablature, and the deep boxed pediments. Also of note are the scriptural quotations on panels mounted in the center of the frieze on the northwest and southwest elevations. Interior. The building has a rectangular floor plan. A second-story slave gallery on three sides with dado paneling to the balcony rail is supported by elongated wooden columns. A double-run stairway located to the left of the front entrance leads to the gallery. Basically unaltered since its construction, the church features original fabric throughout, including wide board floors, wide horizontal board wainscoting, and wide vertical board walls above, and the vaulted lath and plaster ceiling of the nave. Of particular note are the original pews and the scriptural quotations painted on the front of the pulpit, over the rear window and front door, and on the frieze below the slave gallery.
William Body described the nature of the scriptures on the interior.
This church, still standing near where Willtown once was, abandoned and open, is almost as beautiful and entire and clean as when Mr. Blaine had it dedicated to God. It is a wonderful piece of workmanship, a fit place for God to dwell. But when one now looks above its sacred altar, expecting to see the burning bush, his eye will fall on leather-winged bats clinging to its frescoed walls. Mr. Wallace knew that Cleland Blaine wore a black silk gown whenever he attended this church on official duty as its senior deacon, that he was faultily faultless, icily regular, splendidly swell, that his personality dominated the church, and the Black Mingo people regarded him with superstitious awe, and that the Presbyterians need not fear the Blaine church. Mr. Wallace did not see that the same cancerous Calvinism with which he was about to revaccinate his Williamsburg congregation was that very same virus out of which came the bats and owls to the Blaine Black Mingo Baptist Church.
The congregation was never very large, and by the mid-1800s it disbanded, leaving the church abandoned. There it sat as a lone testament to the town that once sat on the banks of the Black Mingo Creek. That is, until some idiot arsonist burned it down in 1992. Now all that's left is the cemetery for the church. There is nothing left of the town of Willtown. The town didn't suffer through the Civil War because, quite honestly, it was already gone by that time. What was once a thriving mercantile center is now a wilderness, remote from South Carolina's population centers. The Black River has been designated a scenic river, and the Black Mingo is a beautiful creek lined with cypress trees. I haven't had the chance to visit the Willtown site. I would have loved to have seen the church before it burned. At the very least, I want to kayak through that area. It's a paddling venue that I've neglected for far too long. If I do get to kayak through the historic Black Mingo area, I'll be sure to write about it on Random Connections. That does it for this episode of Carolina Ghost Towns. Make sure that you check the show notes for additional information, including photos of the old Black Mingo Baptist Church. One last production note. In this episode, I used a lot of AI voices, more so than usual. I'd like to know your opinion of them. I know some folks don't like AI, but I use them because A, people get tired of my voice, and this adds variety, and B, it's just me doing this whole kit and caboodle, and I can't really afford voiceover actors. I have some strict rules about how I use AI. I never use it to generate scripts or content. All of that is done on my own. I only use AI voices for individuals that are no longer living. I don't want some live historian to come back at me and say, "That isn't my voice." Finally, I try to select voices that I think match the quotation. I don't always get that last bit right. Let me know what you think, and thanks for listening.
In this southern ghost town, we found a story untold. In the shadows of the past, we unravel secrets unfold. With each step we take, we journey back in time. In this southern ghost town, we leave our footprints behind.
Thanks for listening. The opening music was composed by Lex FM with additional music from Pixabay. The song Southern Ghost Town was generated by Suno AI. All other music was composed and recorded by me, Tom Taylor. Carolina Ghost Towns is a part of the Random Connections empire. It's pretty much a one-man show, so I wear all the hats, including producer, writer, researcher, sound engineer, publicist, and bartender. If you like the show, please subscribe on your favorite pod venue and be sure to give us feedback. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for the show, you can reach me at carolinaghosttownspod@gmail.com. For more information and show notes, visit randomconnections.com. Thank you.
In this southern ghost town, we found a story untold. In the shadows of the past, we unravel, secrets unfold. With each step we take, we journey back in time. In this southern ghost town, we leave our footprints behind.